Can you imagine a place where you freeze in winds far below zero, while the sun scorches your skin in the same instant? A world born from a violent collision roughly 50 million years ago, when the Indian continent slammed into Asia and heaved the Earth toward the sky. Here, monks chant beneath cliffs no human has ever dared to conquer. Sherpas breathe thin air as if greeting an old friend, and every step bends the rules of survival. Where breath becomes precious, and the line between life and death between heaven and hell narrows to a single heartbeat. Welcome to the Himalaya. From the icy deserts of the high plateau to valleys where spring returns in a blush of soft petals, the Himalayas stretch out with a kind of ancient confidence. Each ridge looks as if it has watched entire civilizations rise and fall. Each river feels like it remembers the first human footsteps that wandered into this world of stone and snow. And as you move deeper into these mountains, the air begins to thin, not just in your lungs, but in the space between thoughts. There is a clarity here that startles you, a reminder that this place was shaped by forces older than memory itself. Khumbu Valley and Sherpa region. Most visitors begin their approach by landing at Tenzing Hillary Airport, a short runway cut into the slope above a narrow valley. Trekkers move out from the airstrip and follow paths that link small settlements occupied by families who have lived at altitude for generations. The elevation is already high enough for some travelers to feel the first signs of thin air, yet daily routines continue without interruption. People carry loads along uneven trails with a steadiness that reflects long familiarity with the terrain. Expeditions organizing their ascent rely on local teams whose work supports each stage of the climbing season. The term Sherpa refers both to an ethnic group and to the role many individuals have taken in high-altitude logistics. Research shows that people raised in these elevations often possess lung capacity and oxygen utilization patterns suited for work in low-density environments. Their contribution includes transporting equipment, establishing camps, and guiding climbers across sections where endurance and precise movement are required. Prayer flags, known as lungta, are fixed to bridges and trail junctions. Each sheet of printed cloth gradually fades under sun and wind. Trekkers pass beneath them during acclimatization walks. These points mark routes used for travel, trade, and religious practice. The valley operates as a cultural and logistical center, where monasteries, homes, and interconnected footpaths support both community life and seasonal climbing activity. Farther along the route, the trail narrows into stone segments. Porters adjust their loads. Guides coordinate timing. Vegetation thins as elevation increases, and the landscape transitions toward harsher conditions. Mount Everest. Mount Everest stands as the highest measured point above sea level, verified through multiple surveying missions across many decades. Its elevation reaches more than 29,000 feet, a height that produces atmospheric conditions rarely encountered in any other environment accessible without aircraft. The mountain is defined by steep faces of ice, long sections of exposed rock, and weather systems that shift rapidly. Glacial fields extend across its lower slopes and form the approach routes used by climbing teams during each season. These features create a terrain that requires precise planning and continuous monitoring. The cold is constant. Even simple tasks demand focus. Gloves make buckles difficult to handle. Goggles fog with each breath. The sense of isolation increases with altitude. Voices carry only a short distance. A climber tying down his pack may appear close, though his words fade almost immediately. Most expeditions begin at base camp. The location functions as a central hub. Teams study weather reports, organize supplies, and prepare oxygen systems. Medical staff check climbers for early signs of altitude stress. The goal is simple. Everyone must adapt before moving higher. Rest days are scheduled to allow the body to adjust to decreasing air density. Climbers often repeat short climbs between camps to improve acclimatization. The transition into the section commonly referred to as the death zone begins once elevations reach levels where the usable oxygen drops to roughly 1/3 of sea level conditions. Supplemental systems become essential for most climbers. Wind intensifies and can remove surface snow in continuous streams. Visibility shifts quickly under these conditions. Camps reinforce tents with additional anchors to maintain safety during stronger gusts. The first documented ascent was completed in 1953 by Tenzing Norgay and Edmund Hillary, setting a baseline for all later attempts. Only a limited number of climbers reach the summit each season. Those who do arrive after moving through conditions where oxygen levels fall to roughly 1/3 of sea level density. Records show that success often depends on timing, weather windows, and the support teams that prepare the route. Risk remains high, even with improved equipment. Most incidents occur during the descent, when fatigue, altitude stress, and shifting weather converge. Climbers generally stay only a few minutes on the summit before beginning the return, aware that the greatest risks remain on the way down. Annapurna Circuit, the living landscape. In another part of the range, the approach begins on ground that still supports forest and cultivated terraces. The trail passes through settlements where long-established communities manage fields and livestock. Trekkers moving through these areas follow wide paths that remain stable even during seasonal changes. Wooden lodges and small tea houses appear regularly, offering meals and simple rooms for the night. The atmosphere feels familiar compared with the environments at extreme altitude. As elevation increases, the terrain shifts. Trees become smaller, then disappear entirely. Rock replaces soil. The trail enters a zone where air grows noticeably drier, and the land resembles a cold desert shaped by long periods of wind exposure. Villages in this section operate as key resting points. Many teams stop in larger settlements to monitor their response to altitude before continuing upward. These locations contain lodges, medical volunteers during peak seasons, and footpaths used for short acclimatization walks. Beyond these settlements, the route climbs steadily. Snow begins to appear in patches across broad slopes. The valley narrows into long corridors defined by steep rock formations. Geological surveys indicate that these walls have been lifted and compressed over millions of years, creating a scale that becomes clearer as trekkers observe their surroundings during the ascent. Movement slows here. Breathing becomes more deliberate as air density continues to drop. Farther ahead, the path rises toward high mountain basins that remain cold throughout the year. Lodges become fewer, and distances between rest points increase. This section marks the transition to the upper passes that define the highest part of the circuit. Tilicho Lake, the turquoise miracle. The approach to one of the highest lakes in Nepal begins with a steady rise across thin air and open slopes. At more than 16,000 feet, the environment shapes every movement. Trekkers often include this basin as a short detour during the Annapurna journey, drawn by the stillness that forms when wind slows and the surrounding terrain absorbs sound. The water maintains a deep blue tone that contrasts clearly with the snow-covered ridges above it. Nearby communities regard the lake with particular respect. Many residents believe its water originates from blessings associated with Shiva, and the basin receives regular visits from religious practitioners who travel here for quiet prayer or reflection. These visits occur alongside the movement of trekkers who pass through during peak seasons. Wildlife sightings are uncommon, but possible. Individuals walking the trail may occasionally notice blue sheep on exposed rock, or, in rare instances, signs of snow leopards that inhabit remote sections of the range. Himalayan vultures sometimes circle above the basin when thermal conditions support their flight. Weather remains variable throughout the year. Clear skies appear frequently during autumn, yet the lake can be covered by fog or intermittent snowfall during other periods. These shifts influence visibility and limit the time trekkers spend near the shoreline before returning to lower elevations. Chitwan National Park. Altitude drops steadily as the terrain descends from the high basins into the lowlands. Air becomes heavier, vegetation increases, and the stark environment of the upper ranges transitions into the humid green of the Terai. Here, at the very foot of the Himalayas, lies Chitwan National Park. Standing at less than 1,000 feet above sea level and functioning as one of the most biologically dense regions connected to the Himalayan system. Meltwater originating in the mountains eventually feeds the Rapti and Narayani rivers, which support the park's forests and marshlands. Elephant grass grows in tall stands across open fields, while sal forests form continuous corridors used by wildlife throughout the year. Wetlands and riverbanks add another layer of habitat, allowing a wide range of species to coexist within a compact geographic area. Chitwan is recognized as a key refuge for the greater one-horned rhinoceros. Once nearing extinction, the population now occupies grassland zones, where conservation measures have stabilized numbers. The forest also supports Royal Bengal tigers, although they remain difficult to observe directly. Their presence is documented through tracks, camera surveys, and monitoring programs that map their movement across the reserve. Gharials rest along sandy river edges, distinguished by their narrow snouts and reliance on freshwater channels maintained by seasonal flow patterns. Activity within the park shifts as the rivers change volume and as animals move between grasslands and forest cover. Kianjin Gompa, Langtang. The trail eventually reaches a cluster of buildings set against high ridgelines marked by old glacier movement. This settlement carries a history that remains visible in its layout. In 2015, a major earthquake triggered a massive slide that destroyed most structures in the area. Many residents were displaced, and entire sections of the valley were reshaped by the impact. Reconstruction began soon after. New stone houses now stand beside remnants of collapsed walls, creating a landscape where past and present occupy the same ground. Lodges built for trekkers operate alongside homes rebuilt by returning families. Paths through the village follow lines established before the disaster, though some routes divert around debris fields that were never fully cleared. Further along the route, the terrain opens to grazing areas used by herders during warmer months. Snow remains on the higher slopes for most of the year, framing the settlement within a setting that demands constant adaptation. The village functions as both a resting point for trekkers and a record of how communities respond when their environment changes suddenly. Ladakh settlements spread thinly across a high plateau introduce the characteristic landscape of Ladakh. Surfaces extend across wide basins with almost no vegetation, creating clear views of ridgelines carved by long cycles of erosion. The sky above Ladakh shows a deep blue tone that remains stable through most of the day, giving the landscape a clarity uncommon at lower elevations. Monasteries stand on elevated ground overlooking narrow settlements built near meltwater channels. Their white walls and stepped structures contrast with the surrounding rock, forming a visual anchor across the plateau. Footpaths link these communities with trade routes that have connected valleys in this region for centuries. Sand fields appear unexpectedly between sections of exposed stone. Wind shapes these areas into gentle contours that shift throughout the season. Travelers moving across the plateau often pause at these transitions to observe how the terrain changes within short distances. Sparse shrubs, shallow streams, and isolated stone homes form patterns that reflect long adaptation to dry conditions. Nubra Valley and Bactrian Camel. Sand dunes begin to replace stone as the route enters a basin shaped by ancient river movement. The contrast becomes immediate. Dunes occupy the valley floor, while snow-covered peaks rise sharply in the distance. Many travelers ask the same question when they first see this terrain combination: how a desert landscape can exist so close to high Himalayan ridges. Historical records provide part of the explanation. For centuries, traders moved through this corridor while crossing a branch of the Silk Road. Caravans relied on pack animals suited for cold and arid conditions. And the Bactrian camel remains the most visible connection to that past. These animals continue to move across the dunes, used by local families who maintain grazing patterns established long before modern roads reached the region. Nubra Valley includes several small settlements built along meltwater channels that support limited agriculture. Houses constructed with stone and compacted soil stand near fields divided by narrow irrigation lines. Monasteries overlook these villages from elevated ridges, and their presence marks sites once used by travelers for rest and trade. Light interacts differently with the basin compared with higher passes. Sand holds warmth during the day, while surrounding peaks retain snow across most seasons. The shift between these two environments creates a visual boundary that becomes clear in low-angle sunlight. Diskit Monastery, a set of white-walled structures rises along a rocky slope in the Nubra region. Its stepped corridors follow the contours of the rock, forming one of the most recognizable centers of Buddhist practice in Ladakh. Historical records trace the origins of the Diskit monastery back more than 3 centuries. Above the main buildings stands a 100-foot statue of Maitreya, inaugurated by the Dalai Lama. The figure's gold and red tones remain visible across long distances and have become a fixed point within the valley. Below the ridge, dunes extend across the basin, interrupted only by small settlements and the movement of Bactrian camels that still serve local families. Supports both religious practice and daily activity within the surrounding settlements. Monks maintain halls used for study, prayer, and community gatherings, while residents visit the complex during festivals and seasonal events. Paths around the complex continue toward villages that connect this cultural site with other parts of the region. Thixi Monastery. Among the many monastic structures that appear along the roads of Ladakh, one complex stands out through the way it rises in successive layers along a steep ridge. The arrangement of white buildings follows a stepped formation that climbs toward a central assembly hall. This is Thixi Monastery, a 12-level complex that includes separate housing for female residents, multiple residential quarters for monks, 10 temples, a main prayer hall, and additional sections used for study and community activity. Movement through the site follows narrow paths that pass between compact courtyards and interconnected terraces. Each level reveals a different segment of the complex, organized around long-standing patterns of Tibetan Buddhist architecture. Visitors often observe how closely the structures align with the shape of the ridge, producing a vertical sequence that becomes clear when viewed from elevated angles. The upper terraces offer wide views across the valley. Light shifts along the white facades throughout the day, defining each tier and revealing the full scale of the construction. From above, the complex appears arranged in a continuous ascent, with the highest structures forming a clear focal point in the landscape. Dal Lake Leaving the arid silence of the highland desert, the journey crosses the Zojila Pass. The dust of Ladakh gives way to calm waters stretching across a vast basin in Kashmir. Surrounded by wooden boathouses and floating gardens located along narrow canals, Dal Lake forms a connected system of waterways, houseboats, and floating gardens that supports daily movement across this part. At dawn, the surface remains nearly unmoved, carrying a thin layer of mist that softens the outlines of the shoreline. Shikara boats begin to appear as local residents navigate toward markets that operate directly on the water. The lake functions as both a transport route and a residential hub. Houseboats positioned along the channels serve as homes and lodging spaces, each built with carved wooden panels that follow long-standing regional patterns. Early morning trade begins as vendors approach in narrow boats filled with vegetables, flowers, and daily supplies. The activity remains quiet, influenced by the stillness of the water and the limited sound produced by the boats. The lake's layout forms a network of waterways that connect residential areas with commercial spaces. Movement through this network remains steady and organized, shaped by routes that have been used for generations. As more boats enter the channels, the lake shifts gradually into its regular pattern of daily activity. Kedarnath Temple. Kedarnath Temple high in the Garhwal section of the Himalayas, a small mountain town, occupies a narrow basin surrounded by rock, snow, and unstable weather. The elevation reaches more than 11,700 feet, and the environment remains harsh for most of the year. At the center of this settlement stands Kedarnath Temple, a sacred site dedicated to Shiva. The structure is built from large grey stone slabs, carved into uniform shapes and fitted with precise alignment. Forming a compact complex positioned near the Korabari Glacier, close to the source area of the Mandakini River. Reaching the temple involves several methods of travel, chosen according to ability and time. Many pilgrims complete the ascent on foot, following the marked trail that rises gradually toward the basin. Others use horses for sections, where the incline becomes more demanding. Porters offering Pithu seats carried on the back, with support frames transport both travelers and supplies, and some Pithus can handle loads approaching 200 pounds. The quickest option is helicopter service operating during the clear weather months. Reducing the multi-hour climb to a short flight that lands near the settlement. The courtyard becomes a gathering point during the active season, where lines form as visitors wait to enter the inner chamber for prayer. Rituals begin early in the day, and the sound of bells carries through the valley as groups rotate through the sanctum. Kedarnath gained global attention after the extreme flooding of 2013. Surrounding structures were destroyed, yet the main temple remained standing. Geological surveys later documented how a massive boulder positioned behind the complex diverted the debris flow and reduced the impact on the core structure. Today, the complex functions as a focal point for religious travel within the region. Pilgrims gather in the courtyard, offer prayers, and rest briefly before beginning their return along the same trail they used to reach the shrine. Bhutan, Kingdom of the Quiet Heart. Dense forest begins to dominate the landscape as the route enters a region organized around a national framework known as Gross National Happiness. This policy was introduced by the Bhutanese king, who argued that a country's progress should be measured not through economic output, but through conditions that allow individuals to experience stability and well-being. The concept rests on the idea that material growth and spiritual development function most effectively when they evolve together. Bhutan structures its approach to development through 4 pillars. The first focuses on equitable social and economic progress. The second centers on the preservation of cultural and spiritual heritage. The third maintains long-term environmental protection, supported by laws that restrict deforestation and promote conservation across large forested areas. The fourth emphasizes governance, with systems designed to balance administrative authority and community participation. Villages appear in small clusters along valleys surrounded by continuous tree cover, and many communities maintain building styles that have remained consistent through generations. Monasteries positioned on elevated terrain often emerge briefly when breaks in the mist reveal portions of their walls and courtyards. These complexes serve as centers for study, ceremony, and local gatherings, and their construction follows architectural methods used throughout the kingdom. Roads connecting the settlements move through sections of thick vegetation, where sound diminishes noticeably under the canopy. Footpaths branch off towards smaller hermitages and seasonal retreat sites, used by monks during periods of extended practice. Punakhadzong, the Fortress of Bliss. Wooden bridges and stone pathways lead toward a fortified complex positioned at the meeting point of 2 rivers known locally as the Father and Mother. This structure, identified as Punakhadzong, serves as one of Bhutan's most significant administrative and monastic centers. Its construction follows traditional Bhutanese techniques using timber frameworks, compact stone walls, and carved details that mark ceremonial entrances and interior courts. The scale of the complex becomes clear when moving between its courtyards, each connected through covered passages that support both monastic routines and official functions. Punakha Dzong has played a central role in national history. It hosted the coronation of past kings and continues to house important religious relics associated with the country's foundational lineage. Assembly halls within the complex accommodate large gatherings during annual festivals, while quieter chambers support study and daily monastic practice. The layout integrates functional areas for administration, ritual activity, and preservation of historic documents. The position between the two rivers shapes the character of the surrounding landscape. Cultivated fields, footpaths, and settlements organize themselves around the water channels that move past the Dzong. Visitors approaching the site often pause along the riverbank, where the full outline of the structure becomes visible across the confluence. Paro Valley. Wooden houses begin to appear across the lower slopes as the route enters a broad agricultural basin shaped by centuries of settlement. The layout follows long patterns of Bhutanese construction. Multi-story homes built with timber frames, earth-packed walls, and hand-carved window panels. Fields arranged in rectangular plots extend toward the river, where families grow rice, wheat, and barley using methods that rely largely on manual labor. Paro Valley functions as a cultural center that connects religious institutions with daily activity. Small shrines stand near footpaths leading toward the larger monastic complexes in the district. Residents move between fields, workshops, and communal spaces at a steady pace that reflects a rhythm maintained across generations. Trade occurs through local markets that operate on fixed weekly schedules, supplying both town residents and nearby villages. The valley also forms an access point for travelers entering Bhutan. Its airport sits between ridgelines, and flights arriving here mark the beginning of many journeys through the country. Movement from the town toward the surrounding hills transitions gradually into forest, where trekking routes lead to higher religious sites. Clusters of homes, cultivated terraces, and administrative buildings form a continuous pattern along the basin floor. Tiger's Nest, Paro Taktsang. A rocky path cuts across the slopes above the Paro Valley and leads to a monastery complex perched on a narrow rocky outcrop nearly 900 meters above the basin floor. The site is known as Tiger's Nest. Texts linked to Bhutan's early Buddhist history describe how Guru Rinpoche reached this location during his travels from Tibet. The account states that he arrived on the back of a tigress and practiced meditation in a cave that later became the core of the monastery. This narrative established the site as a major destination for pilgrims, and its significance has remained consistent across generations. Construction of the complex began in the 17th century under conditions that required methods adapted to steep and limited terrain. Timber was transported along footpaths cut into the rock and lifted into position, with coordinated teams working from anchored platforms. Stone blocks were shaped off-site and secured directly onto the cliff through sequences that relied on manual labor, rope systems, and simple scaffolding. Each structure was assembled in stages to ensure stability before additional levels were added. The process extended across several years and created a network of chambers, courtyards, and stairways that follow the contours of the cliff. Pilgrims and visitors approach the site through a trekking route that rises steadily across forested ground before reaching viewpoints aligned with the main buildings. The final ascent involves a set of steps carved into the slope, offering clear views of the ledge supporting the monastery. If you decide to climb yourself, choosing a sturdy walking stick can be one of the more practical options you should take on the tour. Ningchi river channels widen as the terrain opens into a broad basin marked by dense forest and cultivated land. This region is known as Ningchi, an area distinguished within Tibet for its unusual combination of greenery, orchards, and settled valleys. Agricultural plots extend across flat ground near the water, supported by long-standing systems that direct runoff into organized fields. Peach groves occupy significant portions of the basin. Their annual flowering has shaped local seasonal activity for centuries, and the orchards form one of the clearest indicators of the valley's distinct climate. Houses built with timber and stone stand along the lower slopes, arranged in clusters that follow traditional layouts still maintained by the surrounding communities. Small religious structures appear at intervals across the valley floor. Marking sites used for local ceremonies. The wider setting includes Namcha Barwa, a peak that rises sharply at the bend of the Yarlung Changpo. Its position dominates the eastern horizon and provides a visual boundary for the basin. The river curves around the base of the range before entering narrower sections farther downstream, creating a geographic framework that defines the valley. Roads and footpaths run through agricultural zones, forests, and ridgelines, linking the settlements with administrative centers in the district. Viewed from elevated points, the alignment of river, farmland, and villages forms a clear pattern that distinguishes Nyingchi from the surrounding plateau. Namtso Lake. A wide stretch of salt water occupies a high basin on the Tibetan Plateau, positioned more than 15,000 feet above sea level. This is Namtso Lake, recognized as one of the highest large salt lakes in the world. Its surface shows a consistent clarity across long distances, forming a natural contrast with the surrounding ridgelines and open plains. Shorelines alternate between flat gravel beds and compact earth shaped by long-term mineral deposits. Pilgrims travel along established paths that circle sections of the lake during religious observances held throughout the year. Prayer markers and small stone piles appear at intervals. Decorated yak kept by local families often stand near resting points. Their saddles and fabric ornaments follow regional patterns and have become a recognizable visual element associated with Namtso. Herders maintain these animals as part of daily work and seasonal movement across nearby grazing grounds. Rock formations located to the north and west frame the lake and provide elevated viewpoints used for mapping and observation. From these positions, the expanse of water forms a clear linear boundary against the plateau, marking Namtso as one of the most significant geographic features in central Tibet. Potala Palace. A tiered structure rises along the slope of Mapo Ri, organized in a formation that becomes clear when viewed from the base. Walls arranged in vertical bands lead the eye upward through successive levels of corridors, chapels, storage rooms, and assembly halls. The design reveals the scale of Potala Palace, a complex containing close to 1,000 rooms, divided between the Red Palace and the White Palace, each section holding functions that shape the region's spiritual and administrative history. Construction followed methods developed for large monastic sites across Tibet. Stone walls were set with thick cores for stability, and timber beams linked internal chambers to prevent structural separation across the long facade. Interior routes were arranged to control movement between religious areas, government offices, and residential quarters. Records document the palace as the central seat of authority for centuries, housing lineage leaders, preserving scriptures, and storing artifacts central to Tibetan Buddhist practice. Approaching the complex from lower ground emphasizes its vertical reach. Stairways formed from stone slabs ascend sharply, and the scale of the overall structure becomes more apparent with each section gained. Courtyards positioned between levels provide access points for residents, visiting monks, and workers maintaining the site. From ground level, the alignment of red and white walls appears as a continuous rise toward the uppermost halls, making Patala Palace one of the most identifiable constructions in the region. Mount Kailash. A solitary peak stands apart from surrounding ridges in the western section of the Tibetan Plateau. Its sharply defined faces and near-symmetrical form have positioned Mount Kailash as a central point of spiritual significance for multiple traditions, including Buddhism, Hinduism, Jainism, and Burn. Historical texts refer to the mountain as a site associated with origin stories and foundational teachings, which contributes to its status as a protected summit where climbing is prohibited. Footpaths established around the base form the route known as the Kora. Pilgrims follow this circuit for religious merit, completing segments that cross plains, rise over passes, and descend toward riverbeds shaped by seasonal meltwater. Along the path, small markers, stone piles, and prayer inscriptions indicate resting points used for generations. The upper slopes of Kailash remain untouched by documented expeditions. Regulations reinforce the cultural requirement that the summit remain unscaled, preserving its role as a symbolic axis within the region's religious geography. As the circuit returns to its starting point, the mountain's profile reappears from a different angle, maintaining the same distinct outline that defines it across all approaches. From the violent tectonic collision that formed these peaks 50 million years ago to the quiet devotion of a pilgrim walking the circuit around Mount Kailash today, the Himalaya remains a landscape of profound contrast. We have moved from the oxygen-starved heights of Everest to the humid jungles of Chitwan, from the dry plateaus of Ladakh to the protected valleys of Bhutan. Across every region, one pattern stands out. These mountains are not places humans overcome. They are places we learn to move through with care. In a world that accelerates each year, the roof of the world maintains a different pace. Snow accumulates, glaciers shape the rock, and prayer flags lose their color as seasons pass. The Himalaya does not shift in response to us. It persists, and those who travel through these ranges often return carrying an awareness different from when they began.